Chosen only to bear inbred children, the women lived under the darkest curse ever revealed. Unfolding over decades, a generational nightmare was hidden within the mist-shrouded valleys of West Virginia's Appalachian Mountains, a horror that would only come to light in the autumn of 1973. Since the mid-1800s, the Blackwood family had established themselves as fixtures in Monroe County. Nestled deep within isolated woodland miles from the nearest town of Alderson was their sprawling property. Our investigation begins with Margaret Blackwood, born in 1952. At 21 years old, she stumbled into a local doctor's office, carrying an infant with disturbing physical characteristics. What he witnessed that day was recounted to us by Dr. Howard Reynolds, now 87 years old. She seemed terrified, that poor young woman. The child she brought in was experiencing seizures, had an unusually shaped skull, and facial asymmetry. When I began asking standard medical history questions, Margaret became evasive and agitated. Before leaving abruptly, she whispered something that would haunt me for years. "This is what happens to all the children born at Blackwood Hollow." What Dr. Reynolds couldn't have known was that he had just glimpsed the edge of a nightmare spanning generations. County records revealed that after the Great Depression, the Blackwood property had become increasingly isolated. By the 1950s, the family had withdrawn almost entirely from community life, appearing only occasionally to purchase supplies. What happened next was described by former Sheriff Thomas Miller, who served Monroe County from 1968 to 1982. After that doctor reported his concerns, we began investigating. What we discovered at that property still disturbs me to this day: 3 generations living in a compound of sorts with strict hierarchical rules. The most disturbing aspect was the treatment of the women in the family. The investigation revealed that during the isolation of the Depression era, the Blackwood patriarch, Elijah Blackwood, had established a twisted familial structure. For specific purposes, women in the family were designated, with some chosen solely for reproduction with male relatives to maintain the purity of the bloodline. Even after his death in 1962, this practice continued, with his son Jeremiah enforcing these same practices. Devastating was the psychological impact on these women. They were confined to specific areas of the property, denied education, and indoctrinated with distorted religious beliefs that justified their treatment. Due to the genetic complications of consanguinity, the resulting children often suffered severe developmental and physical challenges. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, check now and subscribe to uncover the darkest family secrets that society tries to hide. Uncomfortable truths about humanity are revealed by these historical investigations, truths that will change how you see the world. When investigators gained access to their property in late 1973, the true extent of the Blackwood family's isolation became apparent. What they found was a self-contained world with its own distorted rules and hierarchy. The family compound consisted of a main house where Jeremiah lived with select male relatives, and 3 smaller structures where different groups of women and children were housed according to their designated purpose within the family. Most disturbing was the discovery of detailed journals kept by both Elijah and Jeremiah Blackwood, which documented their beliefs about bloodline purity and their systematic approach to family reproduction. The devastating consequences were explained by Dr. Elizabeth Harmon, a geneticist who reviewed the case in the early 1980s. The Blackwood family case represents one of the most extreme examples of genetic isolation documented in modern America. A catastrophic concentration of recessive genes was created by their practice of close relative unions over multiple generations. Painfully evident in the children born within the family were the consequences. After the authorities' intervention, medical records were obtained that documented numerous cases of developmental delays, skeletal malformations, heart defects, and compromised immune systems. Perhaps most tragic were the psychological conditions that manifested. Many children displayed significant cognitive impairments, while others exhibited behavior suggesting severe psychological trauma. "I'll never forget examining those children," recalled Sarah Jenkins, a nurse who assisted with medical evaluations when the family was discovered. Beyond the physical symptoms, there was something in their eyes, a combination of confusion and profound sadness. They had no concept of the outside world. Some of the older ones flinched at every movement, suggesting years of mistreatment. Equally disturbing was the women's situation. A life focused entirely around reproduction was imposed on those designated as bearers. They were kept in conditions of extreme psychological control, though they received slightly better nutrition than others. In their early teens, most had begun bearing children, with some having delivered as many as 8 children by their mid-20s. One of these women was Margaret Blackwood, whose visit to Dr. Reynolds had triggered the investigation. As the daughter of Jeremiah's sister, at age 14, she had been designated as a primary bearer. A rare moment of resistance in a lifetime of subjugation was represented by her attempt to seek medical help. Context for how such isolation was possible was provided by county historian Walter Brooks. The Blackwoods owned nearly 200 acres of densely forested land. Over 3 miles away was the nearest neighbor, and to discourage trespassers, the family deliberately spread rumors about dangerous hunting traps and unstable ground. In that era, with limited communication and a cultural tendency to respect privacy in these rural areas, a family could effectively disappear if they chose to. As the women began to share their experiences, the most heartbreaking aspect of the Blackwood case emerged. After being relocated to a specialized care facility, testimonies were eventually provided by 5 of the adult women that revealed the psychological manipulation used to maintain the family structure. Emma Blackwood, who was 32 when authorities discovered the family, had lived her entire life within the compound. The indoctrination process was revealed in her testimony. "From when we were small, they separated us girls. Some were told they would be kitchen women or field women. But those of us with what they called the strong Blackwood features were prepared differently. They taught us that our purpose was sacred, to carry forward the pure blood. We were told the outside world was corrupt and would poison our bloodlines. Through a combination of isolation, religious manipulation, and punishment, the family maintained control. Confinement in a small outbuilding they called the Reflection Room was the fate of women who questioned their roles or attempted to resist, where they would be kept for days with minimal food until they accepted their purpose. The psychological conditioning was described by Rebecca Blackwood, who was 26 and had given birth to 4 children. "They had this ceremony when we turned 13. The men would decide our purpose, and if you were chosen as a bearer, you were given a special pendant, a simple wooden disc with a tree carved into it. We were taught to feel proud of this selection, that we were preserving something precious. It's only now that I understand how wrong it all was." If you feel your heart breaking for these women who never knew freedom, type "they deserved better" in the comments below. Their suffering is acknowledged by your words, helping to ensure these hidden historical atrocities are never forgotten. Severe was the physical and emotional toll on these women. Medical examination showed that many suffered from nutritional deficiencies, untreated chronic conditions, and injuries consistent with physical mistreatment. Lasting damage to their bodies had been caused by the repeated pregnancies, often beginning in adolescence and continuing without adequate recovery time. Beyond the physical trauma, these women suffered complex psychological damage, noted Dr. Catherine Powell, a psychiatrist who worked with the women. They had been raised in an environment where their entire identity and self-worth were tied to reproduction. When removed from this context, many experienced a severe identity crisis. They had no concept of individual choice or autonomy. Perhaps most disturbing was how the family structure perpetuated itself. As guides responsible for teaching and conditioning younger girls for their future roles, older bearer women were eventually reassigned. This created a system where victims became unwitting participants in continuing the cycle of mistreatment. The most complete testimony was provided by Margaret Blackwood, whose courage in seeking outside help ultimately led to the family's discovery. I knew something was wrong when my third child was born with severe problems. The older women told me it was because I hadn't been pure enough in my thoughts, but I'd seen the same problems in other children. When my sister's daughter died at just 4 months old with similar symptoms, something broke in me. I waited for my chance and took my youngest to find help. A disturbing ideological framework that had evolved over generations to justify their practices was revealed by the investigation into the Blackwood family. In Jeremiah Blackwood's quarters, law enforcement discovered a leather-bound book titled The Preservation, which detailed the family's beliefs and rules. The doctrine appeared to have originated with Elijah Blackwood during the 1930s, who combined distorted religious concepts, misunderstood genetics, and a response to economic hardship into a twisted philosophy. Passages claiming that the Blackwood lineage possessed special qualities that would be diminished through mixing with lesser bloodlines were contained in the book. The timing is significant, explained historical researcher Martin Davidson. The Great Depression hit rural communities like Monroe County particularly hard. Many families lost farms that had been in their families for generations. Evidence suggests Elijah Blackwood was deeply affected by seeing neighboring families forced to leave their ancestral lands. His response was to create an extreme form of self-sufficiency and isolation. A rigid hierarchy within the family was established by the doctrine. At the top were keepers, male relatives who made all decisions and rarely engaged in physical labor. Below them were various categories of workers and, most disturbingly, the vessels, female relatives selected for reproduction based on physical characteristics and temperament. Detailed rules for maintaining this system were contained in the book, including instructions for identifying suitable vessels among female children, methods of indoctrination, and even a calendar system for managing reproductive cycles. A profound dehumanization at the core of the family structure was revealed by the clinical, detached language used to describe human beings. Parallels to other closed groups were noted by Professor Elaine Richards, who studied cult behaviors in isolated communities. What makes the Blackwood case particularly disturbing is how they created a complete alternative reality. Unlike many cults centered around a charismatic leader, this was a multi-generational system that had become self-sustaining. Each generation was raised with no concept that their reality was abnormal. When authorities arrested Jeremiah Blackwood, then 51 years old, and 3 other adult male relatives, the extent of the family's preparation for maintaining isolation was discovered. The property included extensive food storage facilities, workshops for repairing equipment, and even a small classroom where children were taught a heavily altered version of history and science designed to reinforce family doctrine. Perhaps most chilling were Jeremiah's final words upon arrest, recorded by Deputy James Wilson: "You think you're saving them, but you're destroying what took generations to perfect. The outside world is the real abomination. Our way preserves what matters." Shockwaves through West Virginia were sent when the Blackwood case finally reached court in 1974, and it eventually gained national attention. Multiple charges related to their treatment of family members were faced by Jeremiah and 3 other male relatives. Due to the unusual nature of the case and the era's limited legal framework for addressing such situations, prosecutors relied primarily on charges of unlawful imprisonment, child endangerment, and various abuse statutes. The victims' limited ability to function in mainstream society and their deep indoctrination complicated the legal proceedings. Many still viewed their abusers as protectors and struggled to understand why their way of life was considered wrong. In my 30 years on the bench, no case disturbed me more deeply than the Blackwood family, later wrote Judge William Hartford, who presided over the case, in his memoirs. The systematic way they had destroyed the autonomy and humanity of their own relatives represented a level of calculated cruelty that haunted everyone involved in the proceedings. A sentence of 40 years in prison was given to Jeremiah Blackwood, where he died in 1985, reportedly still believing in his family's doctrine until the end. Ranging from 15 to 30 years, sentences were received by the other men. For the women and children, new challenges were brought by the aftermath. At a facility near Charleston, a specialized rehabilitation program was established where they received medical treatment, education, and psychological support. Slow and difficult was the progress. Their journey was documented by social worker Deborah Mitchell, who worked with the family members for over a decade. The younger children adapted more readily, though many faced ongoing health and developmental challenges. For the adult women, particularly those who had been vessels, the transition was extremely difficult. They had no concept of making choices for themselves, no education, and no experience of normal social interaction. 5 years after their discovery, 12 of the younger Blackwood children had been placed in adoptive homes, though many required ongoing specialized care. In supervised settings, some of the adult women eventually achieved semi-independent living, while others required lifelong support. Despite being reassured that she had saved many lives, Margaret Blackwood, whose act of courage had exposed the family situation, struggled with profound guilt. She eventually became an advocate for abuse survivors and contributed to educational programs for social workers dealing with cult survivors. Significant changes in how authorities approached isolated communities and potential familial mistreatment were led to by the Blackwood case. New protocols for monitoring remote properties where children might be present were implemented by West Virginia, and training programs were developed to help social service workers identify signs of similar situations. Due to tax delinquency, the property itself, with its dark history, was eventually seized by the county. After debate about what should be done with the land, officials decided to demolish all structures and allow the forest to reclaim the area. Today, nothing remains of the Blackwood compound except overgrown foundations hidden beneath decades of forest growth. As a final note to this disturbing chapter in American history, this reflection was offered by Dr. Powell, who continued to work with survivors until her retirement in 1997. The Blackwood case reminds us how fragile human dignity can be when isolation and distorted belief systems take hold. Yet, it also shows the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. Some of those children born into unimaginable circumstances eventually built meaningful lives. That represents a victory over the darkness that was intended to define them. If you've watched until this point, it's because you connected with this powerful story. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can get to know you and understand who truly appreciates the important historical investigations on this channel. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. Hit like and share this video with others who appreciate uncovering the hidden truths of our past. No matter how uncomfortable they make us feel, these forgotten stories deserve to be acknowledged.